I think that we can agree that God orchestrates wonders. He makes great things true, but what I want you to see is that God always has a person that he does these things through. We've seen in the Old Testament that he used a slave whose name was Joseph to save the world from starvation during a famine. There was a fugitive God chose named Moses. He used him to lead a nation to freedom through an exodus. He used a girl named Esther, who was a servant, to take an entire race of people and preserve them and save them from sure extermination. God used a prostitute named Rahab to hide two Israelite spies so that they could carry on with God's plan for their lives. There was a boy named David, whose job was to watch sheep. God chose him and used him to lead the entire kingdom of Israel. God always has a person. We see in the New Testament that he used a fisherman named Peter to preach to the nations and point people in the direction of salvation. He used a doctor named Luke to write the good news about Jesus so that the world could read it. There was a little boy who was carrying his food, who I can only assume was probably hungry too, but he shared his food and God used him to feed an entire crowd of hungry people who needed to hear the truth. God used Paul, a man who killed people just for knowing Christ. God changed him and used him to impact lives and expand the kingdom. There was a woman named Lydia. For her job, she simply sold clothes that were purple. Well, she got saved, then spread the gospel and started the first church in Europe. God always has a person. In our history, we see that God used an emperor named Constantine to help unify the church and to spread Christianity all around the world. He used a missionary who we know as St. Patrick to bring Christianity and salvation to Ireland so that the people there could accept it. He used John Newton, a former captain of a slave ship, to change his ways and speak out against slavery. He used a local preacher whose name was Benjamin Mays to mentor Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement. There was a preacher named Billy Graham who had struggled in college. He went on to lead revivals because he listened to God's calling. God always has a person. But these people were not perfect. They were regular, ordinary, flawed. They were people who had done things wrong, but it didn't matter because their significance and effectiveness was not in their own talent or ability, but it was in God's call and their availability. I could go on and on listing these names, but in the end, the message is the same. When all these people just said yes to God's call, he used them all. He used them to free from slavery, save from starvation, avoid extermination, and preach to the nations, all so that you and I could more clearly see salvation. And today, God desires a person to use, and he wants that person to be you. God always has a person.